Hello and welcome to this EHS Today webinar, How to Help Your Workers Feel Safe, New Data for 2024, sponsored by AlertMedia. I'm Nicole Stempak, Managing Editor of EHS Today. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's discussion. Bethany Cohen is Content and Communications Manager with AlertMedia. For further information about Bethany and our panel, check out the speakers details tab on your console. Welcome, Bethany, and without further ado, the floor is all yours.
Thanks so much, Nicole. I'm Bethany Cohen, Content and Communications Manager at AlertMedia, and I will be your moderator this afternoon. All of us at AlertMedia have been looking forward to this webinar because we get to give you all a preview of the insights from our annual State of Employee Safety Report. And I think you will find this data helpful, useful, and maybe even surprising. So today we will go over some of the key takeaways from the report, and we will also share strategies for how you can use this data to improve your employee engagement, inform your safety trainings, and enhance the overall culture at your organization. So today's webinar will be interactive, and we will pause for brief polls at each new section to hear how this report resonates with you. We'll also have a few minutes for Q&A after the presentation. So with that said, I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers. First, we have Danielle Sherman. Danielle is the founder and CEO of Wired Research, a leading data and research firm. Back in January, AlertMedia commissioned Danielle's research team to conduct the study that informed our State of Employee Safety Report. Beyond her work on this project, Danielle partners with a wide range of organizations to help them surface data-driven insights and craft compelling stories. Hi, Danielle. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for including me. I'm super excited to be here discussing such compelling research with everyone. So thank you.
We love having you. Excited to dive in. I would also like to welcome Peter Steinfeld. Peter has been involved in the emergency communications industry for more than 20 years. He's the Senior Vice President of Safety Solutions at AlertMedia, where he works closely with a wide range of organizations to support their employee safety, business continuity, and emergency preparedness initiatives. He's also the host of the Employee Safety Podcast, our interview series here at AlertMedia, and recent episodes include conversations with leaders from the United Nations, Starbucks, the Washington Commanders, and more. Hey, Peter, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite webinars that we do each year. There's so much great information, and I can't wait to get into it.
Me too. Excited to dive in. So with that, I'll quickly touch on today's agenda. So today we will just discuss, do employees feel ready to face emergencies at work? Do employers prioritize workplace safety as much as their employees do? Do managers feel prepared to keep their people safe? And what can employers do to help employees feel safer and more valued? All right, so Peter and Danielle, I'll turn it over to you now to discuss the origin of the Employee Safety Report and the methodology that we use to conduct the survey. Peter, do you want to start us off?
Absolutely. So I think we can all agree that employee safety is incredibly important and should be kept just top of mind for any organization. So with that in mind, as Bethany said before, AlertMedia commissioned a survey from Wired Research to ask employees directly how they feel about the safety of their workplace and how they think their employers value employee safety. That's the twist that we have on this that makes it very interesting. I think we can also agree that everyone deserves a safe space to work. So to get the best picture of what employees think, it's really important to have data that's more inclusive demographically. Today's workforce is just very different than it was a few years ago. So our goal was really to cast a very wide net and survey a large range of employees to get an accurate reflection of current perceptions across industries, generations, and different types of employee groups. So Danielle will definitely share more about the demographics of our study a little bit later in the presentation. We also want to understand how managers differed from non-managers on feelings of safety and preparedness. For example, are managers acting as safety champions, or are they just a bit disconnected from safety goals and initiatives? And then finally, we wanted to compile data that was applicable to really any organization, no matter its size, its industry, or its location. Our goal really is to provide data that you can actually use to your advantage. Now, it was important to conduct this particular research right now to address the current challenges that both employers and employees are experiencing. the current threat landscape, for example. Nearly every organization has experienced the impacts of recent severe weather events or natural disasters, no matter where they're located. Disasters and other disruptive events are impacting people with greater frequency and severity, making employees safety more important than ever. And then businesses are also experiencing the impacts of geopolitical conflicts, which we've heard a lot about lately in the news. And because of this, a lot of companies are really reeling from economic uncertainty, which often leaves employees feeling overworked and undersupported. There's also greater emphasis on mental health, which has shifted employee and employer attitudes surrounding safety, a lot different than when I started in the workplace many years ago. And many companies are finding themselves in just new territory as they realize that psychological safety is also part of their charter now. So as a result, employees are increasingly turning to their employers for guidance and support and really just communication to help them navigate these rising safety concerns. And a company's duty of care is really about more than just legal liability. Organizations also have a moral duty of care to protect their employees and prevent harm while on the job. Prioritizing safety is simply the right thing to do on top of being a matter of good faith and a legal requirement. So many organizations have taken steps to reinvent or reimagine their safety cultures as a result of all these different concurrent challenges, which makes this data that we present in the report even more relevant and timely. So with all that being said and that background, Danielle, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to discuss Wired Research's methodology for conducting the employee safety survey.
For sure, and that was incredible background. To sort of ground everyone into what went into the survey, it reached a sample of 2,000 American adults, ages 18 and older. All of our respondents were employed full-time at a US-based company, and we made sure that we included a broad range and a broad cross-section of employees, which to Peter's earlier point included both managers and non-managers. We made sure that our sample also spanned the entire country, wanting to ensure that we had a really healthy, balanced representation of geography, of industry, as well as key demographics like gender, age and generation, and of course, racial and ethnic diversity as well. The survey was fielded between December 1st and December 15th, 2023. So with that overview, I say let's get into some of the report's key insights and findings. First, we're going to look at the very first theme that we want to discuss today, which is how prepared employees feel to face all types of emergencies at work. For clarity, our survey defined emergencies as any incidents that would include things like severe weather, cyber attacks, mental health emergencies, and so much more. And we're going to get into that a little bit later on as well. I think first, we should maybe launch a poll. Would love to hear from you all now. Would love to take a moment to answer the question that should now be on your screen with your own best guess. Approximately what percentage of your organization's employees do you think have personally experienced an emergency at work? Do we think it's 50%, 60%, 70%, or roughly 80%? So let's get those answers in.
I'm curious to see what comes back here. I was wrong when I participated when we did this in practice, but it'd be interesting to see what people respond with.
For sure. And Bethany, I'm assuming we're seeing those numbers coming in.
They are coming in. It's pretty interesting. We're seeing a heavy majority here in one area. Probably just give it a couple more seconds. Really excited to see what the audience thinks on this one. We're still getting some last minute respondents, so probably just give people a little bit more time.
And I think we're seeing it start to slow down. Maybe we can close it out and share out the results.
Let's do it. Here it goes.
All right. So in looking at some of these numbers here, what we're seeing are some interesting feedback. The largest percentages that we're seeing are around 50 and roughly 60%. And the reality is, if we move on to our next screen, is that 86% of working Americans have actually faced an emergency at work. So significantly more than I think some of the crowd believed. And I think this was in line with some of our expectations initially going into this as well. The emergencies they have faced truly run the gamut. Severe weather, of course, being one of the more common emergencies. We see it's impacting 60% of our employees. But what I think may actually surprise some is that workplace violence, perhaps often considered more of an uncommon threat, has affected nearly 1 in 4 employees. And that number spikes to almost 1 in 3 when we start to look at industries like service and hospitality, where there is just so many more individuals at risk of being affected. Next, as you can see here, we've included the full range of emergencies that employees have faced, keeping in mind that even on the lower end of the spectrum, percentages like 22 and 18 are still incredibly significant, considering the millions of people that these numbers actually are meant to represent. Despite the emergencies they may have already faced, many employees actually don't feel prepared to navigate rising threats in their work life. For starters, as you'll see here, more than 2 in 3 employees feel the workplace has to contend with more emergencies at work than ever before. I think the sobering reality is that almost 1 in 2 employees don't put their faith in their employer and believe that they actually wouldn't be contacted if there was actually an emergency threatening their workplace. 1 in 3 admit that they feel unprepared to navigate a work emergency. Peter, I would love to hear from you about how the audience today can use this information on their end.
Yeah, absolutely. AlertMedia has a great case study on this. One of our customers, a software company in the cybersecurity space, was actually striving to build just a safer and more engaged and productive workforce. So they decided to learn what was most important to their employees' safety by going to them directly and asking. So they launched an employee opinion survey that was loosely modeled after the Gallup 12 employee engagement survey, which you can actually find online if you're curious. Again, that's the Gallup 12 employee engagement survey. And it's real short. It's just a 5-minute survey, and it helped the company's HR team determine what employees want and need regarding psychological and physical safety, which helped them then prioritize initiatives, policies, and procedures. So they now run this survey twice a year to keep their finger just on the pulse of employee safety and engagement. And really, surveys like this identify gaps in preparedness, and then they allow organizations to build tailor-made safety programs for their workforce based on what they actually care about. So I really highly recommend that all organizations do some form of this. Just find out from your employees how ready they feel to face emergencies, and then uncover what training and information would help them feel more prepared. Seems simple, but until you do it, you're not going to get that feedback. So now Danielle's actually going to dive into more detail about what employees value most in terms of safety.
Thanks, Peter. And I could not agree more with that. And as you mentioned, the next theme that we did want to explore is just how employee perception of safety compares to their employers. This stat here, wow, it is such a powerful statistic. 97% of employees report that their physical safety at work is important to them. Of course, this was our hypothesis going into the survey, but we wanted to put it to the test as it's incredibly important for employers to understand, especially when we start to get into the data around safety preparedness and the improvements that are really needed today. Let's maybe move into our second poll. Would love to hear from all of you now to let us know what you think. We're going to show you a few statements, and we'd love to know which of these statements about workplace safety really resonates with you the most. And the choices here: I want to trust that I'll make it home safely every day. Everyone deserves a safe place to work. I shouldn't have to trade my safety for a paycheck. It is my employer's duty and responsibility to create a safe workplace. Let's get those answers in. I see some coming in now. And again, we're looking for the statement that really connects with you the most.
All right, looks like we're starting to get some significant answers in. Probably just take a few more seconds here. Really curious to hear what the audience thinks.
Yeah, this is one you got to think about just for a second, and that's okay. We padded the presentation with a few extra minutes for stuff like this, so we appreciate you giving us the feedback.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and share these results.
Awesome. All right. Well, as you can see here, there's a lot of great feedback. It seems like the majority of you, around 52%-ish, connected most with the idea that everyone deserves a safe place to work. Others obviously put the duty and responsibility of care on their employer to create that safe workplace that so many of us feel we all deserve. If we move on to our next slide, as you'll see here, we see that 2 and 3 believe that everyone deserves a safe place to work first and foremost. In fact, about 1 and 2 of our employees wholeheartedly believe that they shouldn't even have to worry about their safety while they're working. They shouldn't have to trade their safety for a paycheck, and they want to have faith that they'll make it home safely every day. But like so many of you also answered on our poll, the duty of care is on the employer. We see that 1 and 2 feel it's their employer's duty and responsibility to create that safe workplace. 39% believe this responsibility of care should actually extend beyond the walls of the corporate workspace and protect employees no matter where they're working, whether that's on the road, whether they're working remotely from home, but that duty of care should still exist. So very similar to how the audience today responded. Next, we're going to get into this idea that employers are prioritizing profits over safety. Despite their feeling that everyone deserves a safe workplace, employees unfortunately believe that their employers are prioritizing things like productivity, profits, reputation over employee safety. And as you'll see on this slide, there is a significant disconnect between the importance that employees are placing on these areas and the importance they believe their employer also places on these same areas. So when we're looking at feeling physically safe at work, there's a pretty big gap between the employee perception and their perception of their employer. Similarly, when we go down to things like profit and productivity, we see that they believe their employer prioritizes this and places more importance on it than they do. And obviously important to note that this disconnect, of course, poses a significant risk to employee engagement and trust. As you'll see on this slide, employees are reporting stagnant or even declining safety efforts from their employer. a number that has been on the rise since we first started probing on this idea in 2022. What we found interesting is that the healthcare, education, and the service and hospitality industries have seen the most reports of declining safety efforts, which of course puts both employees and the communities that they're serving at risk. And coupled with the declining safety efforts being made, we see that trust, morale, mental health, these are all impacted. In fact, more than 7 in 10 employees admit that they've actually lost trust in their employer because of these declining efforts. More than 2 in 3 say that they have even less of a desire to remain working for their employer because of this. And more than 1 in 3 feel that their work environment directly impacts their mental health. Peter, this is a good place to hand it over to you to discuss how attendees can also use this information.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Danielle. I would say that after you've completed the employee survey that we discussed in the last section, the example I gave you of the cybersecurity company putting out that survey a couple times a year, take steps to implement changes based on that employee feedback. If they want more frequent or more in-depth training, add it to your required annual trainings. If they identified a specific type of emergency that they're apprehensive about, practice those drills with your emergency response team and let employees know what you learned from that experience. It's all about communication. Be sure to conduct after-action reports following all these drills and tabletops that you do, as well as any actual emergency that you have. And then keep up with regular employee surveys at least twice a year, like I suggested, or quarterly, even better, if possible. Every culture is different. Some people won't tolerate that. Just to understand how the changes that you've made meet employee expectations, especially if you're introducing changes. You maybe want to do it a bit more frequently because you want to make sure that you're going down the right path and not the wrong one. And then lastly, I'd say it's really essential to encourage and then even celebrate incident reporting, just to continuously improve your safety culture and share need-to-know information with employees when relevant. This is a hard thing for a lot of organizations to do, but I had a great guest on the podcast recently that said they create basically a culture of celebrating incident reporting. That way people do not fear reporting anything whatsoever, and they're able to learn from every incident. They don't blame the person, they look at the problem and see how they can fix it. And then if you think about it, incorporating any kind of employee feedback in your training initiatives will absolutely help employees feel more prepared to face emergencies when they actually happen. So Danielle, back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Peter. Next, we're going to dig into a few slides showing some of the differences between those managers and non-managers that were part of our sample. Specifically, we wanted to understand just how prepared managers feel about keeping their people safe. The first thing that we want to get a read on was what managers and non-managers prioritize in the workplace. As you can see on this slide, while being physically safe at work is universally important to both managers and non-managers, we do start to see a shift between the two groups when we look at other priorities like a company's reputation or the company's financial health. You can see that displayed here quite clearly. But knowing whether managers consider being safe at work is important was really just one piece of the puzzle. We also thought it was incredibly important to dig a little bit more deeply into perceptions of safety at work. And as you'll see here, significantly more managers than non-managers applaud their employers for making more of an effort to ensure safety at work across the last year. So significantly more think their employer has been making more of an effort to ensure safety. And while we found that managers are more comfortable reporting safety hazards and work concerns than their non-manager peers, the majority of managers, in this case more than 2 in 3, feel unprepared to train and protect their people significantly or successfully. And this is quite a large number when you really think about it. 2 in 3 managers are just feeling very much ill-equipped to keep their people safe. So obviously that begged the question, why don't they feel prepared? And I think this slide does a really great job highlighting the limitations that managers report facing in keeping their people safe. 2 in 3 report their ability to keep their people safe is limited in at least one way. And among them, you can see that many of the limitations that were reported are actually related to inadequate support from higher level leaders. As you see on this slide, 48% are saying that many of the decisions are outside of their control. 34% feel there aren't enough training exercises. Almost 1 in 3 sort of blame it on their team being maybe geographically dispersed. 26% feel that they're just not getting clear instructions on how to do it. And that same number at 26% don't feel like they have any of the support that they need. Peter, a good place to hand it back to you. I'd love to know what you think employers should take away from these findings.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, since managers are just poised to be your best safety champions, empowering them to do just that is super important. So as you encourage your full workforce to report safety incidents, ensure that managers have easy access to reporting those safety concerns and full visibility on your efforts to resolve those concerns. It really is a loop. You have an intake and then an output. And then be sure to involve your managers in developing training based on the feedback that you received in your employee surveys, and ensure that they're really specific and relevant to their teams and departments as appropriate. You got folks that are working in an office space, it's going to be much different than what you're going to do for folks working out in perhaps a dangerous manufacturing environment. So make sure it's relevant based on the team. And then lastly, provide managers the resources that they need to reward employees for safety wins, like reporting near misses, completing mandatory training, or volunteering for safety committees. If you don't reward people, they tend to not want to do it over time. So that's a really important part of it as well. I'd say that this very proactive approach will absolutely help your managers feel more included and, most importantly, empowered. We saw that on the stats. They just don't feel empowered to protect employee safety. Now, I think we do have another quick poll to do before we move on to the last section. Is that right? Yeah, here we go. Danielle?
Yes, would love to hear from everyone here today how your organization's safety efforts have changed since last year. Do you feel that those safety efforts have increased? Have they decreased, or have they stayed the same? So let's get those answers in. We definitely see some coming in right now, which is great. Again, we just are curious what your own perceptions are of your employer's safety efforts. And we're going to compare that to what we saw in our poll. And Bethany, I think that answers are slowing down. We could probably lock that in just a second.
All right, just sent them out. Wow, look at that.
Awesome.
Impressive.
All right, so what we see here is that almost 74% of you feel like your employer's safety efforts have increased. And roughly 20% feel that the efforts have remained the same. That is quite impressive, especially when we look at the results of our national study, in which we saw that safety efforts actually seem to be stagnating, and this impacts employee trust. Most employees are really looking for stronger communication from their employers around safety. And we'd love to dig into this with a bit more detail and a bit more color from what we saw in our survey. So as you'll see on this slide, in every survey that we did, in every iteration of this over the last 3 years, we've asked employees what would motivate them to stay with their employer for the long term. And safety still ranks above everything else outside of pay and benefits. What's really important to note here is that these top 3 motivations are trending upward in terms of their importance this year, highlighting once again why it's critical for employers to truly make safety a priority at work. And you can see that here when we compare them side by side. We saw 46% felt that their employer genuinely cares about the safety of employees in 2023, and that has bumped up to 49% in this year's survey. So again, we're seeing this upward trend in terms of importance. And a big part of feeling safe at work is feeling as if their mental health is protected and made a priority. Based on the data from our survey, where half of our employees would grade their employer's focus on mental health a C at best, I think everyone could agree that there's significant work that needs to be done. And perhaps the best place to start making those improvements is really to start amping up safety efforts around communication. 3 in 4 employees feel their employer's safety communication can definitely stand to be improved. And employees report that they want to hear more about the available resources, more about the emergencies that might impact them. And Peter, this is a great time to hear your thoughts again on what everyone can actually do with this information and how they can ultimately improve their own communication with employees.
Yeah, communication is so near and dear to my heart because when you think about it, it's really at the root of lots of wins and problems in organizations. So just get better at communicating overall. But these are actually the top 4 ways the employees we surveyed said their employers could improve communication efforts. With the vast majority of employees having experienced an emergency at work, as we showed before, and nearly as many are increasingly concerned about an emergency affecting them at work presently or in the future, it's really critical to remind them regularly about the available training that's out there. Just because you said it once, people are going to remember it. So you've got to regularly remind folks. Some training is mandatory for all, but since there's an appetite for more, just consider quarterly or monthly reminders about additional safety training that you provide. Another really critical way to improve communication is by using a consistent communication channel during emergencies, something people are familiar with. As a lot of us experienced recently, even major mobile service providers fail occasionally, and your organization needs a reliable method of communication in emergencies. People should kind of be expecting, hey, am I going to be getting a message? I got it during the testing in the last emergency on this particular channel or these channels, and they'll be expecting it come through there in the future. So try to maintain that consistency. We've also talked a lot about leveraging employee feedback through this webinar. So ensure that you're showcasing the changes that you make to maintain a safe workplace. Employee trust will absolutely increase as they see that their voices are being heard. So communicate that out. And then lastly, both experiencing and worrying about emergencies really cause significant stress on employees, and that impacts their productivity and their satisfaction at work. So be sure to share mental health resources regularly, like employee assistance and wellness programs, and highlight psychological safety initiatives like employee resource groups. Here at AlertMedia, we just did that this month, or I think it was in the last few weeks, where we actually just brought everyone together in one of our weekly lunches with the team that is here in Austin, and then folks that join remotely, and just talked about all of our resources again. And then we, on a quarterly basis, make sure people are aware of it. Because if you don't make people aware of it, then they just forget about it. They're embarrassed to ask. So you have to make it front and center. Now, in addition to improving communication, here are a few ways that employers can improve perceptions of safety at work. Interestingly, employees ask for information and updates on the efforts already underway to prioritize mental health, maintain a safe workspace, and updates to protocols and procedures. And this is really good news for security and safety leaders. The idea is that you don't really have to launch a ton of new safety initiatives to improve perceptions of safety at work. It's just about better communication. Training and drills fall somewhere in the middle, with safety talks and communication channel testing rounding out the end of the list there. So overall, employees want to see more transparency around safety from their employers and know what to do in the event of an emergency. That's really it. Bethany, back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Peter and Danielle. This was a fascinating sneak peek at the 2024 State of Employee Safety Report. So many great takeaways for organizations to start implementing now. We do have time for questions, so stick around for Q&A. But just taking a quick minute to launch this final poll, AlertMedia has a team of experienced experts who know employee safety inside and out. So we would be happy to talk to any of you about your specific needs, help you create a plan of action around this new data that we're sharing today, or update your current plan. So just take a moment to let us know. Would you like to hear more about how AlertMedia can help you improve employee safety at your organization? Yes or not at this time? All right. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been such a fantastic discussion. We do have some time here for final questions or comments. So I'll just leave a few more seconds for this poll, and we will move on. Okay, a lot of great questions coming in. I'm just going to take a second to take a look at what we have here. The first one that jumps out at me, especially because what we were just talking about around mental health. Danielle, we covered it a little bit today, but did you ask employees some more specific questions around mental health in this survey?
Yes. So we asked how employees prioritize mental health along with other concerns around safety. We found that 62% of our survey respondents feel that it is extremely important to them. We also found that certain groups like women and younger employees of all genders are more likely to prioritize mental health than their peers. We also found that the younger employees report mental health incidents at work more often than their older colleagues. And I think this could be due to just greater awareness of mental health issues and the support systems that go along with that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. Peter, I don't know if you have a thought on this here, but somebody mentioned a great comment that, when we're thinking about safety incidents, sometimes there's this very objective proof, like a slip, a trip, or a fall, something like that. And it's sort of really easy to document. And thinking around mental health, it's a little bit more subjective. You're not necessarily always going to have a big incident that is as visible as a slip or a trip, and it might not get sort of the same documentation. You mentioned a little bit about kind of sharing resources around mental health throughout the organization, but do you have any other ideas about how an organization can ensure or help support workplace mental health overall?
I think it's number one is just be emotionally aware of folks around you. I just remember starting in the workplace years ago, like over 35 years ago. Frankly, nobody cared. It was just show up, do your work. And really it was. I'll be frank about it. But, that's absolutely changed over time. And I've seen it change just, in my career alone. Now, it starts at the top. The leaders have to set an expectation that mental health is a real thing that we need to watch out for. And it's historically a hidden problem. So from the very top, you have to have messages going out that it's okay to share this information and it's okay to be private about it. And then make sure that people know where to go if they don't feel comfortable discussing it with their manager. Know someone in HR that's designated that they can talk to. If they're not comfortable with talking to someone in the company, make sure that you have an employee assistance program of some sort where they can go to a third party and discuss the issue. So I think those are some things. We could have a whole separate webinar on this, but those are some of the things that I'd recommend.
Those are great ideas. And we talk about all the time, just getting that leadership buy-in for any and all safety initiatives. This is one of them, like coming from the top down, exactly like you said. So great question and great discussion around that. Okay, Danielle, I want to go back to you here. You talked a little bit about the employee groups around mental health issues. Like, are there certain employee groups that think their employer's communication needs improvement more than others, in terms of generational or something like that?
Yes. We found that 86% of our Gen Z employees think that their employer's safety communication needs improvement. We saw that 66% of boomers and older also felt the same way. And while that's a significant difference, it's important to note that 66%, while again, much lower than that 86% of Gen Z, while that 66% is still a majority, it's clear from these data points that improved communication is something that is universally important to all employee groups, irregardless of gender, age, geography. It is something that we all are placing significance on.
Absolutely. That is huge. Like you said, 66%, that's a lot. That's a large majority. Very important to keep that in mind. Okay, Peter, question for you here. Okay, talking again about workplace violence here. Can you speak a little bit, or do you have any thoughts on how this data is going to fit into this new workplace violence bill in California, SB 533, I think it is? What should we take away about this new workplace violence data?
Yeah, I'm starting to dig into that a bit more. With 1 in 4 employees having experienced some kind of workplace violence, there really is no question that the new law in California is going to have an influence over other states as well. So just know that even if you don't have people in California, it's coming. It's really important to consider that even if you aren't in California right now, you may have an expectation for some kind of workplace violence prevention plan soon. Hopefully everyone's doing it already, and this mandate is just kind of giving everyone a little bit of a kick in the butt. But there really are a lot of details to cover there, probably too many for just a quick answer here. But some of the main components that you may want to look into are, number 1, prevention plans. Number 2, incident logs. Number 3, I think it's just detailed employee training, and it's got to be training that's appropriate to the person based on their language, ability to comprehend things. So there's different levels of training you have to provide. You got to think about that. And then lastly, just record maintenance. So key things to look out for there.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be having more discussions about this bill over the coming months. Really important to keep these things in mind. Let's see, Danielle, question here for you. You talked about how a large majority of employees have experienced an emergency at work. That's the one that really surprised us all right at the beginning of our discussion here today. Did those folks who have experienced an emergency respond to these questions differently from people who haven't experienced an emergency at work?
Oh, I love this question. And the answer is yes. So the 86% of employees who reported that they've experienced some sort of emergency at work, they are almost twice as likely as those who haven't to say that they sometimes feel unsafe while working. We also found that they were 20% more likely to trust their employer even less if they gave an insufficient amount of attention to safety. So you can almost think of it as those who've been through it. Maybe their radar is a little bit raised more than those who haven't. And I think it's fair to say that it's likely that their expectations around safety and what an employer is doing to maintain a safe workplace is also going to be higher than those who have never experienced such an emergency.
Wow. That's almost contrary to what I would kind of think intuitively. They've been through it before, they've got tougher skin, but actually it's the opposite. It's that they need even more support and even more education around, preparedness and staying safe, and their expectations are much higher. That's super, super interesting. Okay, a couple more questions here while we still got time. Peter, for you, are there any specific approaches you'd suggest for being transparent with safety incident reporting? I think you talked about it a little bit before with our guest that we had on the podcast, but can you just share more detail around this transparency around reporting and how that works?
Absolutely. I always say attack the problem, not the person. The fastest way to keep things unsafe is to make people feel like they're being attacked personally when you address these issues. That's when people start to hide things, or the blame game starts. People start pointing fingers. So instead, just really attack the problem to identify what went wrong, and then provide process improvement and training around it to ensure that it doesn't happen again.
Absolutely. And I loved what you said before too about that culture of like celebrating near miss reporting and just not just around safety incidents, but when there are near misses, that we celebrate those and we share out, yay, so-and-so had a near miss. So glad we caught it. I thought that was really cool. And I think that transparency, just building that in the culture seems to really catch on and really helps foster that transparent feedback loop, like you were mentioning before. Okay.
It does, absolutely. Yeah, and you have to remember that when you design processes for people to perform, you have to remember that humans are involved, and humans aren't perfect. And this came out in the podcast. It's an excellent episode. I recommend everyone listen to. And you have to, in your process, plan for people to screw up. And if you're planning for that, then of course people are going to screw up. So then when they do, you can't get mad at them. You have to basically say, call it out. Let's talk about it. Let's make sure everyone understands what went wrong so we can try to change the process a little bit to make sure that doesn't happen again.
100%. And that fits in really well with this comment and question we received. Just as a manager, I find that as many as 80% of employees often don't take responsibility to participate and be involved in our safety programs. They just kind of don't take this topic seriously until something bad happens. So what are your thoughts on how to improve that dynamic, overcoming this complacency around emergencies and safety overall?
Is that for me or Danielle?
Oh, I'm sorry, Peter. That one is for you. Thank you.
It comes back to a theme that we've talked about in the presentation so far. It's culture. It comes from the top. You have to make sure that people literally at the top of the organization say, this is a priority for us to run this business. And if people aren't hearing it from the top, and it's not serious and sincere, then they won't take it seriously. And they're just going to say, everyone's just doing this to pay lip service to it. There's a regulation. We're doing it just because we have to. You have to make sure that people understand that that the people that run the company realize they can run the company better if safety is a priority. And if it's not, the company will not perform to its ultimate capacity.
Absolutely.
And I would even add to that and say, going back to what we mentioned, I think at the top of this discussion, is do your research among your employees. If the feeling is that your management team is not taking it seriously, dig into the reasons why. It could be accessibility. It could be they're feeling a lack of support. It could be, again, going back to some of our survey answers, not very clear instruction. So definitely take the time to dig into why there seems to be that bit of a barrier. And then let that, as Peter said, really start to disseminate from the top down. So just one extra thought there.
Yeah,
Great thoughts. Thank you both for sharing. I think we've got time for one last question here. I think maybe this is something that we weren't able to cover in the survey this time, but I think this is a great idea, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. So Danielle, I'll ask you first. Do you know if the survey participants were asked to rate or determine whether they would rate them as proactive when it comes to their personal safety. So, identifying their own role in personal safety, what is my role, or if they would rate themselves as more reactive, as in, the safety topics are sort of delivered to me from management. So basically asking the employees, what is your level or what is your role or responsibility in securing your own safety? Are you kind of proactive? Are you kind of reactive? I thought this was really interesting. I don't know if we covered it in this year's survey, but I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I love that idea. It's a very simple concept. How would you sort of reflect and then rate yourself and your own efforts? We did ask a question in our survey around employee perceptions of their colleagues, of other employees, and their attention to maintaining a safe workspace. And again, across the board, most of our employees did feel that their peers and their counterparts were taking it seriously, but also had that viewpoint that they were woefully unprepared. So there is that disconnect there. I think in some cases, you can be as proactive as can be, but that proactivity might actually be limited based on the tools and the resources that you've been given. So love that idea. I think it's certainly worthwhile to consider for our next iteration of this study. And if for nothing else, then using it as a means to really cut the data, based on those who are proactive versus reactive and how they responded to some of the rest of the survey questions.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Okay, great. I've got one comment that I want to share that I just thought was a really cool safety win. We recently implemented a root cause meeting that includes the president, the VPO, the VP of HR, the safety manager, the supervisor, and the associate, and that it's really contributed to a positive shift in our safety culture. So thank you to whoever shared that. That is a really cool comment and win that I'd love to share there. Okay, fantastic. Well, I think that's about all the time we have for questions. Thank you all for being here today and for sharing these ideas with us and sharing your questions with us. If you have any additional questions, first I would like to direct you to take a look at the report. We only just shared a few key takeaways today, and most of the meat and potatoes is really here in the report itself. So I'll leave this slide up here just for a second so that you can grab this QR code with your cell phones there. Really just the full comprehensive report is going to be available here. So I'll leave that up for just a few more seconds. But then I just like to thank you both, Danielle and Peter, for being here today. Thank you for giving our audience an insider scoop on this data. It's just really fascinating, and I've really enjoyed our discussion today. It really is industry leading research, and I just think it'll be so useful for any organization. So Danielle, thank you so much for doing this with us.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. I loved being part of this. I love talking about these results. Any opportunity that I have to sort of geek out on the really compelling data that we found is just such a privilege for me. So thank you for having me.
Thank you again. And Peter, thank you so much. I know we get to do this together often, but it's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate it. And for those who are attending this webinar today, I know that a lot of you oftentimes struggle to get buy-in from your executive leadership team or budget to improve your safety programs. And think of basically a 1-2 punch you can take to them to help you get buy-in or budget is tug at their heartstrings with anecdotal stories of things that have gone wrong, because that'll make them start paying attention. But then the way you really tug at their purse strings is to show them actual data. And that's what this report provides. It's the data to really back it up. So the anecdote gets them listening, and then the actual data says, okay, it makes sense for us to spend money on this.
Perfect way to leave it there. Folks, if you'd like to continue the conversation with either of our guests, please feel free to email them at the addresses here on this slide. And I just want to thank you all for spending your afternoon with us. We really appreciate your participation and engagement and hope to see you at a future AlertMedia webinar. And now I would like to thank Nicole and everyone at EHS today for having us. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Nicole.
On behalf of EHS Today, have a safe and productive remainder of your day. Take care, everyone.